So my question for everyone is, how can you find your nature and how can you grow out of the way you are, what your nature is, into being a life of service and of love and compassion and vitality? I think these are old choices, and let us each find our way to make those choices well and wisely.
Welcome to the Two Curious MD podcast. I'm Dr. Alya Ahmed.
And I'm Dr. Suraiya Rahman.
With the wisdom from holistic, alternative, and these conventional medicine, we are here to challenge the status quo.
We're curious about the connectivity and complexity between diverse fields of knowledge as they relate to consciousness, chronic illness, mental health, resilience, and beyond.
Learning more about the art and science of healing, or listening to stories of extraordinary healing. You're in the right place. Let's dive in. Welcome to our podcast, The Two Curious MDs, where medicine is more than science, it's story, art, and connection. Today's episode, we explore what it truly means to stay healthy in an increasingly complex and chemically burdened environment. Our guest, Dr. Russell Jaffe, shares insights from decades of experience in integrative and preventive health. And together, we want to really unpack how modern living exposes us to these hidden stressors, from environmental toxins and inflammatory foods to chronic stress and metabolic imbalance, and what we can realistically do about it. Rather than fear-based messaging, this conversation focuses on empowerment. And I hope we can learn about the daily choices in nutrition, recovery, stress management, targeted testing, that can shift body into a resilient mode rather than a stress mode. And we also want to explore Dr. Jaffe's philosophy behind his company that he has and the practical framework for buffering inflammation and supporting immune balance he provides in his work. So welcome, Dr. Jaffe, and
Thank you for that gracious intro. Let me start with, I had very conventional training in internal medicine. Then, by great good fortune, I was invited to the National Institute of Health, known as NIH. I eventually became the head of the residency program there in laboratory medicine, and I stayed on the permanent senior staff until I migrated to what I'm now doing. So my background is a bit unusual. I'm considered to be a father of integrative functional medicine, and I'm very grateful for those who consider me that. And I would like for us to have a conversation about exactly what you were talking about, which is how to be healthy in an increasingly toxic world.
Yeah, thank you for that. I want to ask, what got you started in thinking about this question?
Well, that's a very important question from my point of view. I got started because in the early 1970s, I heard that acupuncture could be helpful. And we at NIH thought that acupuncture was a placebo. So I went and found a guy named Quing Nguyen Wu, who was really seminal in bringing acupuncture back to America. And I spent 7 years in an apprenticeship with him. And then I taught a program called Oriental Medical Strategies in Western Medical Practice at State University of New York. The first year we did 5-element theory, which is integral to traditional TCM, Chinese and Oriental medicine. The second year we did yin-yang, which is balancing forces. And the third year, I wanted them to become as good as I was at reading pulses and therefore understanding what's behind a person's quality of life. So that's a bit about me.
That's amazing. That's a really early kind of experience of what a lot of, I think, physicians are going through right now, which is that our training didn't quite cover everything. And that there's
well
so
said.
much more.
And just for full disclosure, Patch Adams, who was famous in the movie Patch, was part of our small but high-quality group. And Quing was a most remarkable guy. Some other time I'll tell you more about him. But he was a Taoist priest, and he was nice enough to do one of the commitment ceremonies that Rebecca and I had, probably one of the few traditional Taoist ceremonies ever done in Vienna, Virginia.
Beautiful.
Amazing.
I'm curious about the word toxicity, and I'd like to know for our audience too, what kind of exposures impact our immune function, our metabolism, or even our resilience? What would you say?
Well, thanks for asking, because that is a good place to begin. everything that involves you as a person, as a soul, as a being, involves every aspect of who you are and what you are and why you are, who, what, where, when, how, why. And so I became interested in the nature of the human healing response. I was conventionally trained in internal medicine. I was conventionally trained and have double boards in laboratory medicine, courtesy of NIH. But that left me confused and rather limited in being able to evoke human healing responses. That was when I met Qing and did this very traditional apprenticeship in Chinese medicine and in acupuncture. And I'm still a student of life, of being in wonder about the nature of human beings. And I think to some extent I've been helpful to others by being curious and listening deeply to who they are and what they aspire to become and what's behind what they know about themselves.
I love that. I love that. Can I also kind of bring together, as you're talking about internal medicine, which is the training in the mechanistic diagnostics, what can we read? How can we be sensitive to the story and the processes in the body? And then you bring in laboratory medicine, where you're actually measuring things, where you're actually saying, oh, this is out of range. Is it significant? And is it significant? On what level is it significant? And this kind of bringing together this idea of toxicity, like Alya is asking, like, when is something toxic and when is it not? And so when you're thinking about that question, even bringing in the full self, because something can be toxic to your soul, something can be toxic to your body, something can be toxic to your environment or your mental health. And how do we parse those things out? And sometimes it's hard to tell at what level something is occurring at. And so, yeah, Alya, would you like to ask the next question? I just wanted to bring that in.
I am fascinated by what you said as well about kind of going back to the sciences. And I think in integrative medicine, we do talk and really highlight that there is more to the conventional way of learning. And there's more science in the ancient sciences and in the sciences of practice for thousands of years. And why aren't we applying that in conventional medicine? Why have we kind of completely separated our learning to one bucket of knowledge? So I really appreciate that you actually being the father in this process.
Or the grandfather.
The grandfather or a leader and a pioneer in kind of bringing this together, especially in NIH and especially in places where that sort of mindset isn't necessarily there. So the question that I have has to do with the kind of exposures and how do we actually know what is a toxic exposure? When does it become a toxic exposure? And what are its impacts in the body and in the soul and the spirit?
Let me start with what you have just said. What is right for one person may not be right for every person. In internal medicine, I was taught how to do certain laboratory tests and how to mechanistically interpret them. And then I realized in my own life, in the life of those I lived and loved, that was helpful but limited. Helpful and limited in the sense that if you listen deeply to the story of someone's life, you first have to be receptive to the fact that they are a unique being, a unique person, that one size does not fit all, and therefore what we learn in internal medicine is helpful but insufficient. And I have been a curious character for all of my life. I have wanted to know deeply why some people are able to thrive and why some people in the same seeming situation seem to be crushed by the burdens, the traumas, the aspects of their life that leave them bereft. And guess what? Almost all of us have had traumas in life. Some when we were young, some when we were a little bit older. But it is not possible to get through a life without traumas. My question is, how can we turn the trauma into an opportunity to thrive, not just to survive? Because there are many people who live lives of quiet desperation. They live lives doing the best they can, but not realizing that they feel deeply unloved, that they feel deeply at the mercy of their prior early traumas. So what I feel about functional and integrative medicine is that we must embrace all of that in order to find out where the healing can begin and be rather complete for the individual.
Thank you. You're here. So I'm just kind of doing a bit of a imaginary going back in time. Here you are at NIH. You've got patients that are coming to NIH or part of research studies. What kind of patients are leading the way? What are the stories that are grabbing your attention for, oh, this is an unsolved problem, or this is a more complex problem than...
Well, thank you for asking that. The first article that I published in the Annals of Internal Medicine was about a woman named Doris who had had 400 occult blood tests, and they were all negative. But fortunately, their clinicians felt that she was losing blood through her intestines. And so I did something at the time that was a little unusual. I went and talked to her. And I said, Doris, I want you to tell me something that you've never told the other doctors, because I can look in the chart for what the others have heard. And she said, don't take it away from me. Don't take it away from me. I said, ma'am, I'm here to be helpful. I'm not going to take it away from you. And she opened a drawer and she had vitamin C, ascorbate vitamin C. And she says, every time the doctors take this away from me, I feel worse. And then I go back to it and I feel better. So I went down to the lab and I thought, well, what's a little bit unusual about this? We're getting poop from her and it's negative for blood. Maybe the vitamin C is falsely inhibiting the ascorbate. And you may know this because we published in the Annals the fact that not only did vitamin C inhibit the occult blood test at that time, but when you took the vitamin C away, you could see the harm, the blood loss. So that was the first article that I published in the Annals. And I will tell you further that the editor, whose name was Ed Huth, calls me up and says, we'd like to publish your article. And I stop at that point because when an editor calls you up and says, this is okay, you say thank you. But then he said, would you mind if I rewrote your article? Now, no editor had ever called me to offer to rewrite my article. They might make a critique and then you revise the article and resubmit it. He said, you have written this in such a terse scientific way that mere mortals will not understand it. If you let me rewrite it in the English language so that other people will understand it, I would publish it. It was the second most popular article of the year because of him. I have been very much graced and fortunate to have people who advertently or inadvertently looked out for me and made it possible for me to be a curious, inquisitive, hopefully helpful individual who can step outside the usual paradigm to find out where healing can really occur and what is really toxic for that individual.
Thank you for sharing that. What a powerful story of curiosity at the bedside and problem solving and noticing and saying, well, what if it's not that? Or what if it is this? And so who inspired you? I'm curious to hear in your journey through life to this curiosity. Yeah, who inspired you?
Well, who inspired me? I will jump forward to my biochemistry PhD under a man named Carl Franzblau. Now, Carl was very famous for collagen and elastin cross-links. It turns out that these cross-links are derived from the amino acid lysine, and they come together when they do. And what my project was to find out why they did not come together using something called D-penicillamine. Now, penicillamine sounds like penicillin. It is not penicillin. It's not an antibiotic. But in my thesis, we figured out how crosslinks are inhibited by penicillamine, and then we found out how to reverse that process. So that started me on the path of saying, maybe we don't know too much about too many things, and maybe we should be humble and deeply listen and then take our background into how to help someone recover from their toxicity, from their traumas, from the fact that they have lived a certain amount of life, and maybe that is more a burden at the moment than an opportunity. So my position is to find the opportunity in the midst of the burden, and that sometimes means removing the toxicity that is physical, but it turns out that toxicity can be emotional or spiritual. And I'm a very traditional spiritual type of person, so I don't assume that everything is mechanistic or everything can be detected by the usual laboratory tests.
I'm kind of now coming back to our present time, post-COVID, which is a massive, I think you can even look at it from a scientific perspective of like, oh, we have a population level study of what happens to all these different bodies when they go through this massive inflammatory response, right? Some people endured an inflammatory response and it took their life. And some had a less severe response. And now we're left with things like post-COVID syndromes, long COVID, and even this idea of POTS or, kind of Ehlers-Danlos, and POTS being the postural orthostatic hypotension that I think is kind of what we're calling it now. Those are the names we've attached to it. But there's some signal here that something happened on that trauma level that we're talking about. And so if you can talk a little bit about what your understanding is of what these kind of sometimes unusual chronic disease processes that can show up. And we call them different things because we test for Lyme and it's positive, and we test for this and it's positive, and we make a correlation, not really understanding if it's a causation or not. And so I've just opened up this big can of worms, which I think is a big curiosity in the medical field. So please take that as much time as you want with that one.
Well, yes, thank you very much for that, because I think that is a seminal question of our time. On the one hand, if you're conventionally trained, you know a lot of different parts. I think today that the education of physicians is quite inadequate. We learn mechanistically about certain things, but we ignore the subtle side of life. We ignore the early childhood traumas that may have shaped the person who is in front of us today. So when I said deep listening, what I really mean is to be respectful and humble in the presence of another human being whose life hopefully will be made better by you, and therefore you have a responsibility to be intuitive as well as competent, to be caring as well as competent. I think today many young physicians, those graduated in the last decade or more, they are more comfortable on their PDA or their personal device than they are with compassion and ethical, responsive. Evoking the human healing response requires that we be at the level of the person, not above them, not below them, but deeply interested in the story of their life. So I am curious about everyone's life story, and that often helps me to put together whatever I know about laboratory medicine or analysis and intuition. But then you have to apply that very personally to the individual. And I've had the great good fortune of coming upon things that other people had heard but not really understood, or maybe they ignored because they didn't fit the conventional medical paradigm. So I'm, on the one hand, very grateful for my conventional training and understandings, but I feel that that is very limited when it comes to a complex person. And say, with regard to the recent traumas and the recent epidemics that we've had, like COVID, and as you said correctly, for many people, COVID is just like the flu. It comes and goes, and it doesn't really embed deeply into their psyche or embed deeply into their being. And then there are people, some of whom have passed because of COVID. So for them, it was a life-threatening event. And I've had several what are called NDAs or NDEs. These are near-death experiences, which have made me more compassionate, made me a better listener, made me better understanding of the spiritual aspect of people, of the soul inside that individual. And very often people have said to me, I think you're the first physician who has been interested in the subtle side of my life. And I am. I'm very curious about life and each individual, but I also have deep concerns about the way young physicians are trained to look at the laboratory results. And I do have double board certification in laboratory medicine, but that's a beginning. That is not an end. So I am deeply interested in the story of individuals' life, and I don't care what the status or the, quote, importance of the person is. And yes, I've had the great good fortune to meet governors and presidents, and some of them have confided in me because they found me to be a good listener. And on the other hand, I have been helpful to people who have no official status in the world, but are human beings. And if I can convey my compassion, my interest, my willingness to hear deeply what the story of their life is, then maybe I can put it together in a way that reflects back to them their importance as a human being. Not necessarily their importance in an objective, mechanistic world, but each of us is a unique human being with a unique potential to be of service to others, to expand and extend love and concern. And so, to some extent, I have felt the privilege of evoking that human healing response, that natural human capacity to live and be healed, and therefore to serve and to love.
Well, I'm going to ask you a question related to what you just mentioned and talked about is the story of a person and how they present themselves to you in their story. One of the curious questions that I have is that everybody has some level of exposure to trauma, some in the early life, some in the latter part of life, some in the continuous chronic state of life. I'm very curious is why is it that some people present with trauma and it affects their gut, or it affects their heart, or it affects their brain? Or I'm bringing this up because I used to take care of children with Down syndrome, and it was very interesting to me to see that in the Down syndrome, I had about 300 patients that I used to follow and track, that there was always a cohort of children who had either cardiac conditions, but they wouldn't have GI, or they would have autism, but they wouldn't have any, cardiac issues. Or there was always this kind of collection of type of conditions that tended to fall into a certain way. And it didn't seem random. And I'm curious as what's the connection with trauma and its impact in the body? Like, why would it happen that way for this individual versus the same trauma could affect somebody else in a different way in their body?
Well, at a high level, what you say is exactly correct. The trauma is an event that imprints the being, the person, their soul, or their spirit. And in order to understand how to be helpful, you have to be able to relate to different aspects of the human being, the very human, fragile person. One of the things that near-death experiences convinced me is that we're all fragile. And fortunately, I have survived, which means I'm here to talk with you about these issues and to hopefully expand upon them in a way that opens up some possibility of thriving, not just surviving. So at a high level, I want to know what they know about the story of their life. And I am horrified and mortified at how many young people are traumatized in a way that imprints the rest of their life without them necessarily understanding the connection. And so to some extent, I feel that people like me are connectors. We help people to understand that the trauma does not have to control their hormones, their immune defense and repair system, their heart, their lungs, their vision, their being. So at that level, the first thing that I feel it is my responsibility to do is to establish my concern and my willingness to hear what their life story has been. And when you hear what the life story is of many people, your first response is, oh my gosh, how did they really survive? And I think it is helpful for me to extend compassion, extend goodwill and good wishes. And this is outside of the medical frame, but it has allowed me to be helpful to people to get through and to understand that they are lovable and that they can love again, that they can forgive those who traumatized them. Not that the event goes away, but the event no longer controls their hormones, their emotion, their heart. And yes, as you correctly said, if you get to that deep level, you can begin to see why it is that they have digestive problems, why it is that they have heart irregularities or heart pathologies. Now, I am a pathologist, but that was only a beginning for me. I am now integrative. I am now functional. I free people from the thought that I have a certain authority. I encourage them to confide in me what they fear, what they think has happened, because there's the objective truth of what happened to them, and then there is their memory of it. And very often I can help the person to transcend, to go beyond the event that happened. It did happen. Sometimes people make things up, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the fact that many young people are emotionally or physically traumatized. My own dear parents lived such a horrible childhood that they visited upon me and my siblings part of what was still traumatized in them. And I think I have been able to use that to understand more deeply what has traumatized others, and to have them understand that I'm really deeply listening and want them to understand that they are loved by me. I know the love is a very subtle aspect of life, but people have reflected back to me that they felt that I was, quote, the first person who really accepted them as they are and loved them. Because I do. I love everyone. I'm really very fortunate to be able to explain that, but it is, I think, part of what a physician who's supposed to be the servant of the process of healing is able to do if they can. If you can't love, if you can't forgive, then get help. But when you can forgive others, when you can love everyone that you come in contact with, that doesn't mean I like them. That doesn't mean they are a good person in an objective sense, but they can all receive and hopefully be benefited from love. Where do you want me to take this?
So beautiful. I want to bring it in because Alya and I work in, psychedelic medicine. This is a very active space, what you just mentioned. The ability for a person to feel love is that first step of saying, I feel safe with you. That's
Feeling safe. That's so important. Right.
And that's what you're doing. Mm-hmm.
Oh, yes. I try to do that. I humbly would like to feel that I can do that. I've just read articles that low-dose psilocybin can be helpful to help people get over their liver dysfunction, their weight problems, whatever it is that burdens them. So I've had very limited experience, but I've had some very profound experiences with the psychedelic world. I had only one experience with ketamine, but it absolutely expanded my compassion and my ability to be of service to whomever it is that is interacting with me. So if I can expand in any way on that, I'm happy to.
Yeah, thank you so much. I also want to wrap in that you've mentioned, that young physicians these days that we all interact with, we've both been medical educators with medical students and residents and nurses. And there is this recognition in medicine that when we get to the extent of our capabilities with the science, with the, kind of materialist piece, it's like, oh, we've done everything. This patient's in the ICU. We've given all the pressors, everything, and there's nothing more to do, right? We've entered the edge of our expertise. What do we do then? What is the job of the physician in the moment when all of your thinking mind, everything that you've tried everything. And I feel like we come to that edge. And I think that's when the questing begins for a young, trainee to say, well, I'm not going to abandon this person. I'm not going to all of a sudden say, I have nothing to do here. I have nothing to contribute. What more can I contribute? And I think that is that portal that opens to what you just described. It's like, oh, actually, my heart is here.
Mm-hmm.
My heart is connected to this human being in concern, in kinship, in I'm here for you and I won't let you down. And, and we've experienced that when we can be alongside, even as the most horrible thing is happening, something magical appears, some sort of inner healing capability is unlocked. And you're talking exactly about this inner healer, inner intelligence that is there if we create that safety, if we allow love to flow, if we, like you said, deep listening, like you are listening for all the way down to the level of the soul in this person, which they may never have had the opportunity to feel connected to another human being on that level. So I think what you're coming to is kind of like a spiritual practice of medicine almost.
Well, I no longer distinguish the spiritual from the physical. I feel they are intimately related. And for some reason, I remember a short story by Harry Stack Sullivan. He was one of the most famous psychiatrists of his time. And he gave a talk that I heard, and he said there are only two reasons why people go into psychiatry. One, to cure their mother, and the other to cure themselves. And they are rarely successful in either case. So that is to say that we should remain humble and of service to the other person at whatever level they need. If they need psychedelic therapy, we should guide them towards that in the most wise and intuitive way we can. Whether we've had experiences or not, they need to be healed. They need to feel compassionate love. They need to feel that someone cares deeply about their essence as well as their physical being. And this is what I have been mentored to do and what I do my best to repay the mentors that I had by being that way towards everyone that I come in contact with.
I think I appreciate that the fact that toxicity isn't just about chemicals or our environment, which it is, but it's also about connection and not having that kind of trusted reliance or alliance with your person that you go to get help with, and how that's such a vital part of healing. So thank you for bringing that to light.
Right. So there is the external toxin, the PFAS, the mercury, the cadmium, the other toxins that we get exposed to just by having the birthright of being alive today. Now, how does our body manage to detoxify? How does our body manage to be not permanently impaired by these environmental, chemical, real toxins? I'm a toxicologist. We haven't talked much about that, but I am considered to be a rather creative toxicologist, which means understanding what the physical and emotional and spiritual toxins are in a person's life, and then opening up to them the fact that someone, me, cares deeply about them enough to help them transcend or be no longer at the mercy of those toxins. We're going to be exposed to microplastic, for example. Many people far too much. I'm glad to tell you that in my world, in my home and in my life, we have managed to eliminate microplastic almost entirely. And what that means to me is that I have the privilege to point out to other people where they might be exposed to these permanent, disabling toxins and how to no longer be at the mercy of them. It's no longer necessary to be exposed to PFAS, to be exposed to microplastic, to be exposed to heavy metals. You can live a life rather free of them, and the little bit that you get exposed to, your body can detoxify.
Right. So it's about the total dose and the exposure over time. And I'm curious about, you see microplastics, when I think about, we found microplastics now in every tissue in the body. And so this compound is now in some way embedded within us, in our cells. And so what is the spiritual impact of that? We have some ideas about the physical impact of it, maybe we're still discovering, but what is, Maybe I can
Well,
ask
for
that way.
full disclosure, I have friends at the Center for Disease Control and still at NIH, and so I get to be measured for these toxins. And I'm glad to tell you that my body is pretty much free of them. And I want everyone to be free of them because it is possible. Recently, I had routine measurements like cholesterol. My cholesterol was 123. That is low, but not too low, because too low is too low and too high is too high, but just right is just right. And despite my cholesterol being 123, by convention, the physicians who were taking care of me put me on a statin drug. Now, statins are very common. They're a $50 billion industry in the United States, but they also deplete fat-soluble vitamins. So they're a double-edged sword. They can be helpful, but they can be potentially harmful or risk-inducing. So part of what I try to do is to find out where people need medicines, where people need love, where people need to be detoxified, which might mean low-temperature saunas. It might be green dichromatic light. It might be things that are a bit unconventional, but for that individual, they might be the keys to removing from them the toxicity that they have. So as a toxicologist, what I have tried to do is to be sensitive to the wide range of things that remove toxic burden, because we all do have some. But I'm glad to tell you that the last 3 times that my microplastic was measured, mine was absent. Mine was 0. Why? Because I have done my best in my life to be not exposed and therefore not at the mercy of these very common, and the average person is exposed to just much too much of these kinds of toxins. So I'm here to say that it is possible to live a life that is free of microtoxins like microplastic, which means pretty much free of plastic. Because if you drink water out of a plastic bottle, you will get exposed to microplastic. But if you drink the water that we have here from our well, or from our glass bottles, or from a steel bottle, you might be able to avoid microplastic. So the things that we assume are necessary as part of 21st century living, I challenge. I think we can live a life that is free of most of these toxins, and our liver and our body can remove the remaining small amounts that we get exposed to. If you expose your body to too much of heavy metals, you will be at the mercy of that. And very often, the toxic lead or mercury or cadmium or arsenic came into an individual when they were a child just teething on white paint. Today, unfortunately, in many states, white paint is allowed to have more lead than I want in my living, in my life, in my home. So I live in an old house, and therefore I have to repair things in my old house. But I have had toxicologists and mold experts and various other people come to visit with me, and they consistently said, "Oh my God, you're not having toxic mold. You're not having toxic chemicals. You're avoiding these things." And I say, yes, it is my privilege to recognize the potential toxins and to stay away from them. Now, as you have probably understood, I have the privilege of understanding where many of these toxins come from and how to avoid them. But I want everyone to have the understanding that I do, how to live in the toxic world without being intoxicated.
Intoxicated. That is such a double word there. There is this notion, and you touched upon it a little bit, and I just want to say, when we talk about toxicity, the dose matters, the frequency matters, and the body is able to take care of some of it. Like, it's not that we've evolved, all these hundreds of thousands of years, and all of a sudden we're like super vulnerable to, all kinds of toxins. It's like, no, actually, our environment has now evolved to a certain extent that the amount of dose, the amount of duration of interaction with these toxins, because of the way of our lifestyle and the way that everything is constituted, is overwhelming our system. And so it's that overwhelm that we're talking about because, as you said, there's more privilege and less privilege. There's some people who don't have the ability to understand this. When we talk about globally, there's so many toxins that are revealed or picked up out of the soil because of mining operations, and the water table gets contaminated, and lots of people are being, kind of overwhelmed in that way, that intoxication that you talk about. But what we're trying to say is behavior changes, make it so that you can withstand a certain amount of a smaller, so it's almost like a window of tolerance. And I've started to talk about a lot of things in this window of tolerance way, even mental health, even like what you're describing is like, when does something become an illness is when I feel like it's crossed over the threshold of my window of tolerance. And so we can respect the fact that the body has its own innate ability to take care of a lot of things, and that we can upregulate that ability. We can help it along. We can get out of our own way, but also that there's a time when that gets kind of overwhelmed. And that's when being more aware of things. So can you tell me a little bit about what are some of the most common toxins you talk about? You mentioned microplastics and cadmium and arsenic. What else is out there? And mold, but, and I wonder if it also moves by region. But what are you seeing out there that you would like people to know more about or pay attention to?
Well, as you implied, very often people are unaware of the toxic burden that they're exposed to. Very often people are not aware of the heavy metals, the lead, cadmium, mercury, arsenic, and the like. And very often the things that they have chosen to be exposed to are also sources of these toxins. So what I have done, fortunately, is to live a very simple life with a well water. Therefore, I don't have city water. We have been offered the chance to be plugged into city water. And I said to the person who came to offer this, but the city water has toxins in it, everything from fluoride to heavy metals, for a variety of reasons. We could get into the details of that. But very often the convenience of our time is also a source of burden and toxicity. And so I have chosen to live near a creek, but with a well. And my exposure is very limited by choice. What I will say is the following. Avoid plastics and get things in glass. When we drink sparkling water, which I do like, it's Pellegrino water in glass, not in plastic. So these are choices that we make every day. And if we're informed, I think we can make wiser choices that therefore reduce the amount of the toxin to the level that our body can traditionally detoxify. What you said is profoundly true. We are immersed in many potential toxins. And if we don't take proactive, discerning choices in our life, we'll probably be marinating in a sea of these toxins. Because I am a toxicologist and because I have friends, I'm able to measure my own level of these toxins. And fortunately, I am pretty much free of them. And whenever they find anything that is potentially toxic that I am being exposed to, then I find out where am I being exposed and how can I eliminate that from my life. So I understand that I am privileged with my background and with my interests, but I want everyone to know that there are simple choices you can make to avoid unnecessary plastic. For example, don't buy food in styrofoam. Don't buy anything that has flexible saran wrap or plastic wrap around it, because especially if the food is warm, and many times you might want to get something that is warm, and I do too, but I want to make sure that I'm not inviting the toxins into my body and into my life.
What are the ways of clearing the toxins as you talk about in some of your work? And I think for our audience specifically, are there ways and means besides just avoidance, which is also a challenge these days? How do we clear our toxins from our body, and what's the safest way to do that?
Well, the safest way to do that is to be good to your intestines and your liver and your body organs. Fortunately, I have a strong liver. Why? Because I don't abuse it. I don't let fat accumulate in my liver. Half of Americans have too much fat in their liver, that has come because of convenience and convenient foods. Around my life, around my place, we eat whole foods, organic or biodynamic to the extent possible. 15 years ago, my dear son started a permaculture biodynamic food forest in our front yard. We don't have anything that needs to be mowed or chemically treated, but we do have a wide variety of herbs and healthy food that we walk outside in the evening and harvest and take back in and consume. So I think the kinds of choices that I'm implying are what I mean: to live a life well and fully, be able to enjoy the advantages of our civilization and our time without the burdens of toxicity. So I'm trying to say that most of the toxins come from convenience, and I have chosen to live a simpler life with less convenience and more wholeness. I think nature, nurture, and wholeness provide us many guides to what is good for us and what is not. And today, unfortunately, many of the things that we accept as part of 21st century living should be avoided. And you will live a life better, healthier, and more advantageous to your being. I'm now of an age where most of my friends and people of my age are burdened by fatty liver, by digestive disturbances, by cardiorenal problems, and I'm glad to tell you that I do get measured on a regular basis because I want to know if something has crept in, but they come back and say, well, you're functioning at the age of 40. I'm almost twice that. By choice, I want to live well and long. My main mentor, and I've had a number of extremely fortunate to be mentored by a number of people, but my main mentor lived with me from the age of 80 until he was 110. And I am planning to outlive him if I have the good fortune of doing that. But I also want to live a life that says to others, you can have a joyful, fully alive, very much engaged life without accepting the toxicity of modern living.
Thank you for sharing that and bringing in how much that is an intentionality, how much that is a everyday practice and awareness. Absolutely. Like there's an increasing movement towards growing our own food, of looking at our soil as part of our health. The health of our soil is the health of our bodies. Just expanding the awareness that we are not just within these bodies, but our bodies are so intimately connected with everything around us that taking care of that aspect is what will lead to long-term health. And I love that image of, living beyond 110. And what I want to ask is, where do you find the joy? Where do you find the joy in life? What keeps you motivated?
I find the simpler aspects of life are very joyful to me. When I'm interacting with people that I love and are my friends, I find that really vivifying. That helps stimulate my joy of living. When I go out and eat from the garden in our front yard, I am very grateful to have much of our food come from a garden. And if you can't, or you're not able to do what I do, you can at least go and get organic whole foods, or super organic, which is called biodynamic. And that is, if you are able to get biodynamic foods, that will be certified by the Demeter, that's Demeter, Demeter Society, which was founded by Rudolf Steiner many years ago. And he was a guy of great intuitive wisdom who founded biodynamic farming. He founded anthroposophic medicine, and he was a guy who lived a quality of life that for me is a good example of how to live our lives today. The fellow that I was mentioning, my mentor for 30 years, we've done a book about Bhante Dharmawara, a most unusual Buddhist monk who was beloved by the Sihanouk family in Cambodia, by the Nehru family in India, by the royal family of Thailand. The first time that I saw him with His Holiness the Dalai Lama came over and put his forehead on Bhante's toes as a sign of respect and reverence. And when that happened, I was standing next to Bhante, but when that happened, I said, as soon as His Holiness went to the receiving line, this was on Capitol Hill, where senators and congressmen were waiting for him. I said, what just happened? He looked at me with a little smile and he said, well, you see, I outrank him. Now, I had been, for many years, his devoted student, his aide-de-camp, but I did not know that in the Buddhist world, there are actually 3 monks who outrank the Dalai Lama. And he was one. He was the head of the World Buddhist Fellowship, which brought back to India Buddhism and a kind of socially engaged Buddhism, which is what brought me to him. And if you're interested, we've done a book about his most remarkable life, and I've had the privilege of writing 4 books and hopefully more to come about how fortunate I was to fall in love with life, to fall in love with other people that have mentored and inspired me, and I want others to be inspired in the same way, because we all deserve to be loved. We all deserve to be treated as if we're special. When a woman is pregnant, I think she should be treated like a queen. And I was very fortunate to find, at the age of 40, I finally found Rebecca, and we did not expect to have children, but now we have 2 wonderful young people. And she came from a different culture. She came from a different society. She came from a different religion. But we found a way to be respectful of each other and to express our love for each other and to have the gift of children.
I have a personal question here because
Sure.
you've brought up this idea of longevity and longevity in relationships, longevity in the heart, the relationship to the heart of really sustaining that love for life. And so what do you do? Or if you can just leave us with a pointer towards what's the skill when we're not able to do that, right? Like sometimes we find ourselves in a place where we can't do that or there's a barrier there. What brings you back?
Well, every barrier is an opportunity to remove the barrier. I was fortunate to be mentored by people who said, just show up and do something. We're too busy doing what we do. And in many cases, that was really, really true. So from my point of view, we all have the opportunity to feel and experience forgiveness, to feel and experience the love of life, and therefore the love of everyone around us, whether they be good or bad. I'm not saying that bad people are not bad. Unfortunately, there are too many of them in the world. But what I am saying is that we can use discernment, we can use intuition, we can use a sense of, this is a person that I like. This is a person I want to have more interaction with. This is a person who can help and inspire me. And the opposite is also true. I've met a number of people who are powerful and elected in prominent places, and I didn't want to have anything to do with them. And I have met other people who I have been inspired to get to know, to find how can I be of help to them and of service to them so that they will allow me to have the privilege of interacting with them. So I feel that we are never bereft of the opportunity to be detoxified, to be forgiven and forgive, to be loving and loved, and that these are healing aspects of modern living. Yes, today we have too many toxins that we are exposed to until we wake up to find out how we can avoid the toxins that it is possible, and in most cases it is possible to avoid, but also how to be good to our liver and our biological parts of our body that are designed to meet the toxin and rid us of that, to meet the stress of high-tech living and let us still be living, loving, and joyful in the face of all of that. Yes, I understand that life has challenges and stresses. My daughter's godfather includes the Dalai Lama, Amory Lovins, and a third person who you wouldn't know of, but all of them have been very gracious to help her survive her parents and to be innately spiritual, but also very functional, high-level functioning human being. Her company grows out of MIT and Stanford, And until very recently, she was the chairman and CEO of a very successful ethical AI company. You may think that artificial intelligence and ethics are not compatible. She and her cohorts, her people around her, have shown that it is possible. So I take this as an opportunity to always be curious about what is the part of life that is meant for us to live, and what is the part of our life that is meant for us to say, no, thank you. I think too many people feel that they are at the mercy of these toxins, of the stresses that adversely affect their hormones, their quality of living. I'm saying no to all of that. And if you have the good fortune to have a few good friends who hopefully can inspire you to be more of yourself every day, as I have, it makes life much more joyful. It makes the flow of life much more alive and possible.
Yeah. I really want to
Thank
say
you.
what you said. I definitely agree with the sense of empowerment that I'm feeling from listening to you. And this idea that we can say no, that we should say no, and we can say no to plastics. We don't have to accept a bottled water plastic bottle. We don't have to accept plastic wrappings for every little utensil and every little item that has to come from a store, that we can go back to the basics, that we can use, reuse, and refuse.
Well said. Very well said. My son is also a woodworker. We sent him to the Port Townsend Woodworking School, and he came back and he made wooden utensils that we use every day. And I think of him fondly because of the gifts that he has given to us. And as you said correctly, very often there is a non-toxic possibility or a toxic exposure. When we know what the toxins are, we can choose to avoid them and to not be at the mercy of them. And I know I've said that several times, but I feel that saying that repeatedly can hopefully inspire people to live a life that is well lived and inspired.
I want to bring in one more piece. I think you've hit upon all the points that you had put in your form. The only point that maybe we haven't touched upon is the alkaline way. And so if you want to expand on that, please feel free.
Oh, I'd be happy to. We have a book called The Alkaline Way of Living. This is to inspire you to avoid the toxins and to embrace the possibility of living what's called an alkaline way, which means that you eat a diet that is net contributing to the alkaline, mineral-rich way of your body thriving. The alkaline way is a way of simplifying the complexity of modern living so that you can have more whole foods and less processed foods. It turns out that my colleagues have expounded upon this more than I have, but ultra-processed foods, which today incorporate 50% of the calories that most people eat, are excluded from my life by choice. So simplifying your life, embracing wholeness, which means organic or biodynamic foods, which means staying well hydrated, but with healthy water, water that either comes from a well or from glass, not water that comes from plastic or convenience. And unfortunately, most of the water that we get from commercial sources or urban sources is contaminated. I've said it, and it is. Now, I know there are people who are more erudite than I who are trying to reform the process, but in the meantime, we should be very careful about the water we drink, about the foods we eat. And to keep it simple, the more whole, the more organic or biodynamic the foods that you eat, the more herbs that you include in your diet, your body will say thank you by being more alive, being more joyful in every way throughout the day, and will reward you with sustainable good health. Yes, I've had my challenges, but as I kind of indicated, when you measure my functionality, I'm functioning at the age of 40 when I'm twice that age. I want everyone to be able to continue to live well and long and joyful and able to embrace the good fortune we have today is that we can make these choices for our life, for our loving, for our relationships, for our soul. And these are all, for me, important aspects of a life well lived.
The balance of alkaline and acid, bringing in the idea that it's the pH, it's the kind of balance that exists in our entire body, and that we have the ability to change it from acidic to alkaline, and that there is some value there that is realized on a systemic level. Tell me about that.
Well said.
What is it, that concept?
Well said.
Thank you.
Most people today are living with too much acid in their environment and in their lives, and you can measure this because we now have the technology to do it, either in blood, venous blood, or arterial blood, and you can confirm that most people today are living an acid-forming life. And with the book that we have written, The Alkaline Way, we want people to know that they can choose to live in a more alkaline, sustainable, joyful, loving way. All of it is part of a whole. A life well lived includes what you eat, what you drink, what you think, and what you do. I've had more than 50 years of mindfulness meditation under mentors that have been willing to put up with me. And I think we all deserve to find someone who is wise and loving and find how to be of help to them so that they can be of help to us. I am saying very specifically that the people who have molded and mentored me have been very willing to impart to me their wisdom, their lifestyle, their joy of living, whether it was prominent or not important. But it was still a life well lived. And I think we all deserve to have a life well lived if we choose or can choose those patterns that make for an alkaline way of living, for example. Not too alkaline, not too acid, just right is just right. And as I said, most of us are under the burden of being too acidic in our biology, in our blood, and we can choose a diet, a lifestyle that is alkaline forming, and therefore reform ourselves at whatever age we are. And I have been fortunate to know people at 80, 90, and 100 who are alive and well provisioned. When Bonte was 110, he had highest frequent flyer status on 3 different airlines because he was asked to go and serve many parts of the world, and he was very grateful for the opportunity to do that. So take a look at the book, Bhante Dharmawara, An Extraordinary Buddhist Monk. Take a look at our book, The Alkaline Way, and hopefully benefit from what we have been fortunate to convey in writing and in the joy of living.
Thank you. And with that, I think, that's such a lovely way to leave our audience and this conversation is with some tools, some follow-up that they can do. And I'm hearing very clearly that being aware of the kind of people that you allow into your space, of the quality of your own being commensurate to the quality of the people around you, and that being a really deep well that we can really resource from is very important. And we say that, right? When we're talking about teenagers, it's like that your life is going to be a amalgamation of the 5 people that are closest around you. Is one way we kind of think about it. Well, think about who those 5 people are and what they contribute. And talking about this kind of relationality, which is bidirectional. It shouldn't be one directional. It should actually be something of a give and take, and how that can be nourishing, that we're nourishing each other through those connections. So thank you so much for this conversation and for...
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Alya, would
and
you like to...
Thank you for the questions and for the compassion that you obviously live and express to those around you. And yes, relationship is, for me, very important. So let us go forth and prosper in knowing that we can be healthy, even though in a toxic world.
As we close, we usually close with a question of curiosity. We may not be able to answer it, but it'll be something for our audience to really listen to and maybe stay creative and curious as well. So what would be a curious question that you would have about this world, this topic that we talked about, and or, what you're noticing in your environment and your world.
So my question for everyone is, how can you find your nature, and how can you grow out of the way you are, what your nature is, into being a life of service and of love and compassion and vitality? I think these are old choices, and let us each find our way to make those choices well and wisely.
I love that question.
Thank you.
We find our way back into nature, into
Our own
vitality.
nature.
Nature is there to nurture us.
Yeah.
We have too often forgotten our intimate connection with nature, nurture, and wholeness. So let today be the first day of the future, because the past is behind us, the future has not come, the future is full of choices. Let them be wisely made.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
A privilege to be with you. I've enjoyed it a lot. I'm so glad that we had this time together.
Thanks for joining us on the Two Curious MD podcast. We hope today's episode inspired you to ask new questions and explore fresh perspectives. We challenge you to ask us those unasked questions that you're curious about in your medical practice, condition, health, and wellness.
If you enjoyed the podcast, don't forget to subscribe, share it with somebody just as curious, and leave us a review. It helps us keep the curiosity alive. Post or comment with a question or curious inquiry that you have and seek to explore or learn with us. Stay curious, and we'll see you next time.